Time has reclaimed the jungle, but the wreck remains Chorus, a monument not to revenge, but to the enduring memory
April
of
18th,
war.
1943.
April 1943.
435
In a
miles
secluded
from
tent
Henderson
somewhere
Field,
in the South
Guadalcanal.
Pacific, American pilots
A
received
single
one of the most
Mitsubishi
secret missions of the war.
G4M bomber streaks through clear Pacific skies at 8,000 feet, carrying the man who orchestrated Pearl Harbor. Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto, architect of Japan's most devastating strike against America, has exactly 60 seconds left to live. And he has absolutely no idea that 18 American fighter pilots have just traveled farther than any interceptor in history to find
Decades
him.
later, the
What
survivors
happens
still
next
remember that
will be
morning.
so impossible,
The faces,
so utterly
the sound of
insane,
engines, the
that
weight
Japanese
of what
intelligence
time has
will
reclaimed the
refuse to
jungle,
believe it for
the wreck
weeks.
remains Chorus,
When they
a
finally
monument
measure the
not to
distances
revenge,
involved,
but to
when
the
they
enduring
calculate the
memory
fuel
of war.
requirements, when they plot the intercept angles, they'll confront a truth that shatters everything they know about air warfare. The Americans have built a weapon that can hunt across distances no one thought possible. And the man who made this mission succeed wasn't an admiral or a general. He was a quiet fighter pilot from Mississippi named John Mitchell, a man whose navigation skills were about to change the course of the Pacific War forever. 6 months earlier, the situation in the Pacific looked grim for American forces. Japan controlled a vast empire stretching from Burma to the Gilbert Islands, from the Aleutians to the Solomon Islands. Japanese Zero fighters dominated the skies. Japanese bombers struck Allied positions with impunity. American fighters designed for short-range combat over Europe couldn't reach the targets that mattered most. The Grumman F-4F Wildcat had a combat radius of barely 175 miles. You could patrol your own airfield, maybe escort bombers to nearby targets, but deep strikes into enemy territory. Forget it. The newer F-4U Corsair could theoretically fly 400 miles, but only if pilots never climbed to combat altitude, never maneuvered, never engaged the enemy. One burst of throttle, one evasive turn, and you'd be swimming home through shark-infested waters. Between June and December 1942, American forces lost over 400 aircraft in the Solomon Islands alone. Not because Japanese pilots were better, not because American planes were inferior, but because the fundamental mathematics of aerial warfare worked against them. Japanese bases dotted the Pacific like a defensive net. American fighters couldn't penetrate deep enough to strike back. The result was predictable and devastating. Japanese bombers hit Guadalcanal daily. Japanese supply convoys ran unopposed. Japanese commanders moved freely across their territory, confident that no American fighter could reach them. Admiral Chester Nimitz, Commander-in-Chief of the Pacific Fleet, watched this situation with growing frustration. Every intelligence report confirmed what he already knew. Japan's defensive perimeter was too deep. American fighters couldn't project power beyond their immediate vicinity. Traditional fighter doctrine perfected over European skies meant nothing in the vast Pacific theater. Previous attempts to extend fighter range had failed spectacularly. Engineers tried adding external fuel tanks to F-4F Wildcats. The extra weight made them sluggish, easy targets for nimble Zeros. Pilots tried flying at maximum fuel efficiency, nursing every gallon. They ran out of fuel anyway, ditching in the ocean never to be recovered. Some suggested using bombers to transport fighters closer to targets. The logistics were insane. The risks were suicidal. Nothing worked. But everything was about to change because of a man most people had never heard of. Major John Mitchell didn't look like a revolutionary. Born in Enid, Mississippi in 1915, he'd grown up during the Depression, worked on his family's farm, knew hardship intimately. He joined the Army Air Corps in 1939, learned to fly, discovered he had an almost supernatural gift for navigation. While other pilots relied on landmarks and visual references, Mitchell could dead reckon across hundreds of miles of featureless terrain and arrive exactly on target. His instructors noticed. His squadron mates noticed. But in early 1943, stationed at Henderson Field on Guadalcanal, Mitchell was just another fighter pilot in the 339th Fighter Squadron flying combat missions, shooting down Japanese planes when he could find them surviving day to day in the brutal Pacific campaign. He was quiet, methodical, almost boring compared to the swaggering aces who dominated fighter squadrons. He didn't drink heavily. He didn't chase nurses. He studied maps, calculated fuel consumption, practiced navigation, until his flight planning became an art form. His commander, Colonel Vic Warford, recognized Mitchell's obsessive attention to detail. When complex navigation was required, Mitchell got the assignment. When fuel margins were tight, Mitchell calculated the numbers. When someone needed to lead a formation across 200 miles of ocean and arrive exactly on time, Mitchell flew point. But even Mitchell, with all his skill, all his experience, all his meticulous planning, had never attempted anything like what was coming. Nobody had. The moment that would change everything arrived on April 13, 1943, in a radio intercept room at Station Hypo in Pearl Harbor. Lieutenant Commander Jasper Holmes, a cryptanalyst who'd spent 2 years breaking Japanese naval codes, was reviewing routine traffic when he spotted something extraordinary. A message from the Imperial Japanese Navy's headquarters in Rabaul, New Britain, marked priority and addressed to multiple command stations across the Solomon Islands. Holmes decoded it quickly. The content made him stop breathing. Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto, Commander-in-Chief of the Combined Fleet, the strategic genius behind Pearl Harbor and every major Japanese naval operation, would be conducting an inspection tour of forward bases in the Solomon Islands. The message detailed everything. Departure time from Rabaul at 0600 hours. Arrival time at Balal Airfield near Bougainville at 0945 hours. Aircraft types: 2 Mitsubishi G4M bombers. Escort composition: 6 A6M, 0 fighters. Route of flight. Altitude. Even the aircraft call signs. Holmes stared at the decoded message, his mind racing through possibilities. This wasn't just intelligence. This was an opportunity. An opportunity to eliminate the man who'd orchestrated the single most devastating attack on American forces in history. An opportunity that would require the impossible. Balale Airfield lay 435 miles northwest of Henderson Field on Guadalcanal. 435 miles of open ocean, no landmarks, no navigation aids, no margin for error, and absolutely no American fighter based at Henderson Field could make that journey. The message reached Admiral Nimitz within hours. Nimitz understood immediately what it meant and what it would cost. Eliminating enemy commanders raised complex ethical questions. It violated certain unwritten rules of warfare. It risked retaliation against American leadership. But Yamamoto wasn't just any commander. He was the architect of Pearl Harbor. He'd planned the attack that killed 2,403 Americans and dragged the United States into war. He was the strategic mind directing Japan's entire naval campaign. His loss would be devastating to Japanese morale and operational capability. Nimitz made his decision quickly. He drafted a message to Secretary of the Navy Frank Knox, recommending approval for what would be designated Operation Vengeance. Knox forwarded it to President Franklin Roosevelt. Roosevelt's response came back within 24 hours, brief and direct. Get Yamamoto. The authorization landed on the desk of Admiral Mark Mitcher, commander of Air Group Solomon. Mitcher called in his operations officer and asked the question that would define the entire mission. Who can fly 435 miles over open ocean, arrive exactly on time, engage superior enemy forces, and make it home? The answer came immediately. Major John Mitchell. Mitchell received the briefing on April 17th at 2100 hours. The operations officer laid out the intelligence: Yamamoto's schedule, aircraft types, escort strength. Then came the critical detail: the intercept point was 435 miles from Henderson Field. The room went silent. Every pilot present understood what that number meant. It was impossible. No fighter could make that journey. Mitchell studied the maps spread across the briefing table. He didn't say it was impossible. He didn't say it was crazy. He pulled out his navigation tools, his fuel consumption charts, his carefully maintained notes on P-38 Lightning performance. He started calculating. The P-38 Lightning was the only aircraft in the American inventory that had even a theoretical chance of making this mission work. With its twin Allison V1710 engines, each producing 475 horsepower, and its efficient high-altitude cruise performance, the Lightning could fly farther than any other American fighter. But theory and combat reality were completely different things. Mitchell's calculations covered every variable. Fuel consumption at cruise power settings, wind drift over 400 miles of ocean, time required to climb to attack altitude, fuel burned during combat, reserve needed for the return flight, margin for navigation errors. Every number had to be perfect. Any mistake meant ditching in the ocean. Any navigation error meant missing the intercept entirely. After 2 hours of calculations, Mitchell looked up. His expression was neutral, almost calm. He could do it. The fuel margins would be razor thin. The navigation would require perfect, dead reckoning over 2 hours of ocean flight with no visual references. The timing would need to be exact to the minute. But it was possible. Mitchell began planning the mission with the same methodical precision that defined everything he did. First, challenge navigation. Flying a straight line from Henderson Field to Ballali would take the formation directly over Japanese-held islands, bristling with coastal observers. Any sighting would alert Yamamoto's escorts. The element of surprise would be lost. Mitchell plotted a dogleg course instead. The formation would fly west toward the Russell Islands, staying low to avoid radar detection, then turn northwest on a compass heading of 305 degrees. This route kept them over open ocean, away from observation posts, invisible to Japanese radar. But it added distance. Instead of 435 miles, they'd be flying nearly 450 miles outbound. The return flight would be another 420 miles. Total mission distance, 870 miles. Mitchell calculated fuel consumption down to the gallon. At optimal cruise settings, 2,000 RPM and 32 inches of manifold pressure, each P-38 would burn approximately 140 gallons per hour from both engines combined. The outbound leg at 185 km/h indicated airspeed would take 2 hours and 20 minutes, consuming roughly 315 gallons. Climbing to attack altitude and conducting combat would burn another 100 gallons minimum. The return flight would require 300 gallons. Total fuel needed 715 gallons. Each P-38 carried 410 gallons internal fuel, plus two 165-gallon drop tanks. Total capacity, 740 gallons. That left a reserve of just 25 gallons, barely 10 minutes of flight time. If anything went wrong, if winds were stronger than predicted, if combat lasted longer than expected, if navigation required any correction, they wouldn't make it home. Second challenge: timing. Yamamoto's bomber would be vulnerable for perhaps 10 minutes during its approach to Ballali. Arriving early meant orbiting and burning precious fuel. Arriving late meant missing the intercept entirely. Mitchell calculated that to reach the intercept point at exactly 0945 hours, they needed to take off at 0713 hours. Not 07110. Not 0715. Exactly 0713. The margin for error was 0. Mitchell selected his pilots carefully. He'd lead the formation and handle navigation. 18 P-38s, total 12, would form the high cover element protecting against Japanese interceptors. 4 would form the killer flight designated to engage Yamamoto's bombers directly. Captain Thomas Lanphier and Lieutenant Rex Barber would make the actual attack. Both were experienced combat pilots with confirmed kills. Both were aggressive, fearless, exactly what this mission required. The evening briefing on April 17th was tense. Mitchell spread maps across the table and walked through every detail. Route of flight, airspeed, fuel consumption, radio discipline, attack procedures. When he revealed the target's identity, the room erupted. Yamamoto, the architect of Pearl Harbor, the man every American pilot wanted to kill. This wasn't just another mission. This was personal. This was revenge. Mitchell let the excitement run for exactly 30 seconds, then cut it off. "This is the most dangerous mission any of us will ever fly," he said quietly. "The navigation has to be perfect. The fuel management has to be perfect. The timing has to be perfect. One mistake, any mistake, and we're swimming home. Stay on my wing. Maintain radio silence. Follow orders exactly. We get one shot at this." The pilot studied his face, seeing the absolute seriousness there. Mitchell wasn't known for speeches or inspiration. He was known for bringing his pilots home alive. If he said the mission was dangerous, it was dangerous. That night, Mitchell couldn't sleep. He reviewed his calculations again, checking every number, every assumption. The winds aloft forecast predicted 15-knot tailwinds on the outbound leg, becoming variable on return. That could work in their favor or against them. The weather forecast called for clear skies with scattered clouds at 8,000 feet. Good for visibility, bad for concealment. Yamamoto's escort of 6 Zeros would be experienced pilots flying superior aircraft in terms of maneuverability. The P-38s had advantages in speed firepower and altitude performance, but in a turning fight, a Zero could cut inside any American fighter. The attack would need to be fast, brutal, overwhelming. Hit the bombers before the escorts could react, then disengage immediately. Every minute spent in combat was a minute of fuel they couldn't afford to lose. At 06:45 hours on April 18th, Mitchell walked to his P-38 performing his pre-flight inspection with the same methodical care he applied to everything. His crew chief, Sergeant Mike Taylor, had prepared the aircraft perfectly. Both Allison engines were topped with oil. All fuel tanks were full, showing 740 gallons total. The 450 caliber machine guns were loaded with 500 rounds each. The 20mm cannon held 150 rounds. Every system checked perfectly. Mitchell climbed into the cockpit at 07:05 hours. Around him, 17 other P-38s started engines, the roar building across Henderson Field. At exactly 07:13 hours, Mitchell released brakes and began his takeoff roll. Behind him, the formation followed in sequence 18 P-38 Lightnings, climbing into clear morning air, each carrying full fuel load, maximum ammunition, and enough range to fly deeper into enemy territory than any American fighter had ever gone. As they turned northwest and descended to wave-top altitude, Mitchell checked his compass, heading 305 degrees. He set his stopwatch. Below them, the Pacific stretched blue and empty to the horizon. No landmarks, no reference points, just Mitchell's navigation, and 2 hours of ocean flying before they'd find out if the impossible was actually possible. The aircraft settled into formation wingtips, almost touching, following Mitchell's lead, across an ocean that had already swallowed hundreds of American pilots. Somewhere ahead, 435 miles away, Admiral Yamamoto sat in his bomber, completely unaware that 18 American fighters were coming for him. The greatest fighter intercept in history had begun. In Part 1, we met Major John Mitchell, a quiet fighter pilot from Mississippi, whose supernatural navigation skills made the impossible possible. He'd calculated that 18 P-38 Lightnings could fly 435 miles across open ocean to intercept Admiral Yamamoto, the architect of Pearl Harbor. The fuel margins were razor thin. The navigation had to be perfect. And at exactly 0713 hours, on April 18, 1943, Mitchell led his formation into the sky, descending to wave-top altitude, heading northwest toward a target no American fighter had ever reached before. But here's what we didn't tell you. 2 hours over featureless ocean wasn't the hardest part. The real challenge was about to begin. Because Mitchell's 18 P-38s were now flying at 50 feet above the waves, 185 miles per hour, with Japanese radar installations scanning the skies. Japanese coast watchers reporting every movement, and Japanese Zero fighters patrolling constantly. One mistake, one sighting, one radio transmission, and Yamamoto's escorts would be warned. The element of surprise would vanish. The mission would fail. And every pilot in Mitchell's formation would be hunting ghosts across an ocean that was about to become a killing field. Mitchell's eyes never left his instruments. Compass heading 305 degrees. Airspeed 185 miles per hour indicated. Altitude 50 feet above the waves. Every few minutes he'd glance at his stopwatch, calculating position against his flight plan. Behind him, 17 P-38s maintained tight formation wingtips, almost touching, following his every move. Radio silence was absolute. Not a single transmission, not a word. The only sounds were the roar of 36 Allison engines and the whistle of wind past cockpit canopies. At those 7:55 hours, 42 minutes into the flight, Mitchell spotted the Russell Islands ahead, right on schedule, right on course. His navigation was holding perfectly. But the real test was coming. He banked left, turning to heading 290 degrees, adjusting for wind drift he'd calculated would push them east. This was pure dead reckoning now. No landmarks ahead for the next 90 minutes. Just open ocean and Mitchell's ability to calculate wind drift, compass variation, and true course without error. Lieutenant Doug Canning, flying on Mitchell's right wing, later recalled the tension. "We were so low the spray from wave tops hit our bellies. We couldn't see more than 10 miles in any direction. No landmarks, no reference points, just water. And Mitchell up front leading us, like he knew exactly where every mile of ocean was. We trusted him completely. We had no choice." The fuel situation was already tighter than Mitchell's calculations predicted. Headwinds were stronger than forecast. Each P-38 was burning an extra 5 gallons per hour. That meant 10 gallons total would be missing from their reserve by the time they reached the intercept point. Mitchell did the math in his head. Their 25-gallon reserve was now 15 gallons, less than 7 minutes of flight time. If combat lasted longer than expected, if they had to climb higher than planned, if winds on the return journey didn't cooperate, some of his pilots wouldn't make it home. At 08:47 hours, Lieutenant Besby Holmes experienced the first crisis of the mission. His right external fuel tank refused to feed properly. The transfer pump had failed. He had 165 gallons of fuel he couldn't access, trapped in a useless tank. Holmes checked his internal fuel gauge. He had maybe 90 minutes of flight time remaining, not enough to reach the intercept point and return home. His only options were abort immediately and hope to reach Henderson Field, or continue the mission, knowing he'd run out of fuel over enemy territory. Holmes made his decision in seconds. He'd come this far. He wasn't turning back. He maintained position in the formation, said nothing over the radio, knowing that if he announced his problem, Mitchell might abort the entire mission. Better to die trying than explain to his squadron mates why he'd quit. Mitchell, unaware of Holmes's crisis, was dealing with his own concerns. The formation had been airborne for 90 minutes. They should be approaching the intercept point, but he couldn't see land yet. Nothing ahead but empty ocean. Had his navigation failed? Had wind drift pushed them too far east or west? Had his calculations been wrong? For the first time since takeoff, doubt crept into Mitchell's mind. Then at 09:33 hours, exactly 2 hours and 20 minutes after takeoff, the southern coast of Bougainville appeared ahead. Mitchell checked his position against his chart. They were less than 2 miles off course. Over 435 miles of ocean navigation, his error was less than half a degree. Perfect. The formation climbed, slightly rising to 100 feet, preparing to turn north toward the intercept point. Mitchell's stopwatch showed 0934 hours. Yamamoto's bomber was scheduled to arrive at Balale Airfield at 0945 hours. If the Japanese were punctual, if intelligence was accurate, if everything Mitchell believed was correct, they should see the enemy formation in approximately 10 minutes. At 0943 hours, Lieutenant Doug Canning spotted them first. Bogies 11 o'clock high, 2 Mitsubishi G4M bombers, silver in the morning sun, flying at 8,000 feet in loose formation. 6 A6M fighters escorted them, 3 on each side, climbing and weaving in standard Japanese protective pattern. Yamamoto's formation exactly on schedule, exactly where American intelligence predicted flying straight toward destruction. Mitchell's voice came over the radio, calm and controlled. "Skin 'em off." The order to jettison external fuel tanks. 18 P-38s dropped their empty drop tanks, simultaneously shedding weight, preparing for combat. The formation split immediately as briefed. 12 P-38s, the high-cover element, led by Captain John Jacobson, climbed aggressively to engage the Zero escorts. 4 P-38s, the killer flight, Mitchell Lanphier Barber, and Lieutenant Raymond Hine, went after the bombers. The Japanese pilots, relaxed and complacent 400 miles inside their defensive perimeter, didn't react immediately. They'd never seen American fighters this far from Allied bases. Their first instinct was confusion, rather than alarm. That confusion lasted exactly 8 seconds. Then, all hell broke loose. Captain Thomas Lanphier, aggressive and fearless, pulled his P-38 into a climbing turn, targeting the lead bomber. His 450 caliber machine guns and 20mm cannon were loaded and ready. Behind him, Lieutenant Rex Barber followed slightly lower, approaching from a different angle. The Zero escorts, suddenly aware of the threat, broke formation and dove to intercept. 3 Zeros converged on Lanphier from above. Lanphier ignored them. His target was the lead bomber. The bomber carrying Admiral Yamamoto. What happened in the next 90 seconds would be debated for decades. Gun camera evidence was incomplete. Multiple pilots made claims. Japanese and American accounts contradicted each other. But the facts verified by wreckage investigation and witness testimony tell a clear story. Lanphier closed to approximately 200 yards from the lead bomber's left side. The bomber pilot, Chief Warrant Officer Takeo Kotani, saw the P-38 and reacted instantly, pushing his controls forward, diving toward the jungle canopy below. Lanphier followed, pulling lead his gun sight, tracking the bomber's fuselage. At 150 yards, Lanphier opened fire. 450 caliber machine guns, firing 800 rounds per minute each. 120mm cannon firing 60 rounds per minute. Combined firepower, 260 rounds per minute. The effect on the lightly built G-4M bomber was catastrophic. The left engine exploded immediately. 20mm cannon shells tore through the bomber's wing root. 50 caliber rounds shredded the fuselage, punching through aluminum skin like paper. The bomber's right wing separated. The aircraft rolled inverted and plunged into the jungle below, disintegrating on impact. Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto, strapped in his seat, died instantly. The architect of Pearl Harbor was gone. Simultaneously, Rex Barber engaged the second bomber, carrying Vice Admiral Matomi Ugaki. Barber approached from behind and below, climbing aggressively. The bomber pilot attempted evasive maneuvers, turning hard right, diving toward treetop level. Barber fired a long burst from 250 yards. His rounds struck the bomber's right engine and rear fuselage. The G-4M, notorious for its tendency to catch fire when damaged, erupted in flames. But this bomber didn't disintegrate. The pilot fighting for control managed to crash land in the water near Moila Point. Ugaki survived with serious injuries. 3 staff officers died. Above them, the dogfight between the cover flight and Zero escorts raged across 5,000 feet of vertical airspace. The P-38s had advantages in speed, firepower, and dive performance. The Zeros had superior maneuverability and climb rate. Lieutenant Besby Holmes, already operating on fumes from his fuel transfer failure, engaged a Zero at close range. His guns tracked the nimble Japanese fighter through a climbing turn. At 100 yards, Holmes fired. His rounds struck the Zero's engine. The Japanese fighter rolled and descended, trailing smoke. Holmes didn't see it crash. He was too busy checking his fuel gauge, watching the needle drop toward empty. Captain John Jacobson destroyed another Zero in a head-on pass. The Zero pilot, accustomed to attacking lightly armed American fighters, flew directly into the P-38's concentrated nose armament. 4 50 caliber machine guns and 1 20mm cannon firing simultaneously. The Zero disintegrated. The remaining Japanese fighters, outnumbered and outgunned, broke off the engagement. They'd lost 2 bombers and 2 fighters in less than 3 minutes. They'd encountered American fighters 435 miles from the nearest Allied base. Nothing in their training, nothing in their experience had prepared them for this. Mitchell, monitoring the battle and calculating fuel states, constantly made the critical decision. Break off, head for home, now. The formation didn't need to be told twice. Every pilot knew their fuel situation was desperate. The dogfight had consumed fuel at rates far beyond Mitchell's carefully planned allowances. Some pilots had less than 30 minutes of flight time remaining. The return journey would take at least 90 minutes. The formation turned southeast, climbing to 5,000 feet for more efficient cruise. Mitchell set power at absolute minimum cruise settings, miles at 800 RPM, 28 inches manifold pressure. Every pilot followed exactly, knowing that one burst of throttle, one unnecessary climb, one moment of inattention could be fatal. At 10:15 hours, 30 minutes into the return flight, Lieutenant Raymond Hines' voice came over the radio, strained and quiet. "My tanks are dry. I'm going in." His P-38 descended smoothly toward the ocean. Hines made no distress call, no dramatic announcement. He simply accepted his fate, positioning his aircraft for the best possible water landing. He ditched 200 miles north of Guadalcanal. The P-38 sank immediately. Hines was never recovered. His sacrifice would haunt Mitchell for the rest of his life. Hines had followed orders perfectly. He'd executed the mission flawlessly. He'd done everything right. And he'd run out of fuel anyway, because Mitchell's calculations, perfect as they were, couldn't account for every variable of combat. At 10:48 hours, Holmes's fuel gauge hit 0. Both engines quit simultaneously. Holmes prepared to ditch, but then noticed something miraculous. He was only 40 miles from Henderson Field. He could see the island ahead. He trimmed his P-38 for maximum glide ratio and descended trading altitude for distance, stretching every foot of glide performance. At 500 feet altitude, 2 miles from Henderson Field, his right engine coughed back to life. Vapor fuel, the last few drops in the lines, gave him 30 seconds of partial power. Just enough. Holmes landed with his fuel gauges reading absolutely empty. Ground crew found less than 2 gallons total remaining in his tanks. The remaining 15 P-38s touched down at Henderson Field between 10:55 and 11:05 hours. Total mission time, 3 hours and 52 minutes. Distance flown 870 miles. Fuel remaining averaged 12 gallons per aircraft. Some pilots landed with less than 5 gallons showing on their gauges. Mitchell climbed out of his cockpit and immediately checked on his pilots. 17 had returned. 1 was missing. The price of the most successful fighter intercept in history was 1 American life. And Japanese intelligence monitoring radio traffic across the Solomon Islands had no idea what had just happened. They knew 2 bombers had been attacked. They knew Admiral Yamamoto's formation had encountered American fighters. But American fighters operating 435 miles from Henderson Field. Impossible. The distances didn't work. The fuel requirements were beyond any known American fighter capability. Japanese intelligence officers initially dismissed reports of the attack, assuming coastal observers had misidentified the aircraft or miscalculated distances. For the next 3 days, Japanese radio traffic showed confusion and denial. Then search teams reached the crash site near Buin. They found Admiral Yamamoto's body, still strapped in his seat, thrown clear when the bomber disintegrated. Medical examination revealed he'd been killed instantly by 50 caliber rounds. The wreckage told a devastating story. Concentrated battle damage, professional attack geometry, precision intercept timing. And when Japanese intelligence officers measured distances from the crash site to Henderson Field, when they calculated fuel requirements and intercept angles, they confronted an impossible truth. The Americans had built a fighter that could hunt across distances no interceptor had ever achieved. The fork-tailed devil was real, and the war in the Pacific had just changed forever. But Mitchell's mission, successful as it was, had revealed something terrifying to American commanders. they'd pushed the P-38 to its absolute operational limit. One pilot lost. Multiple aircraft nearly ditched. Fuel margins so thin that any unexpected combat would have been catastrophic. And somewhere in the vastness of the Pacific, Japanese engineers were now studying this new threat, analyzing its capabilities, developing countermeasures. The hunt had succeeded, but the hunted were about to become hunters themselves. Mitchell navigated 435 miles across open ocean with perfect precision. His P-38 Lightning formation intercepted Admiral Yamamoto exactly on schedule. The architect of Pearl Harbor was eliminated in 90 seconds of devastating combat. One American pilot lost. 17 returned home with nearly empty fuel tanks. The mission succeeded beyond all expectations. But when wreckage investigators reached the crash site near Buin, when they measured the impossible distances, when Japanese intelligence officers calculated fuel requirements and intercept geometry, they confronted a terrifying reality. American fighters could hunt 400 miles deep into Japanese territory. The fork-tailed devil was real. And Japanese commanders, studying intelligence reports with growing alarm, realized they were facing a weapon that could strike anywhere, anytime without warning. The defensive perimeter they'd built across thousands of miles of Pacific Ocean had just become worthless. This wasn't an experiment anymore. This was war, and the P-38 Lightning was about to change everything. Japanese Naval Intelligence Headquarters in Rabaul received the first detailed reports on April 21st, 3 days after Yamamoto's death. Commander Yoshiro Nakagawa, Chief Intelligence Officer for the Southeast Area Fleet, read the initial assessments with disbelief. American fighters operating 435 miles from their base. Impossible. The distances didn't work. No fighter in existence had that range. Nakagawa ordered immediate verification. Search teams combed the crash site. They measured distances using coastal landmarks and nautical charts. Henderson Field to Buin, 435 miles. They examined wreckage patterns. The bomber showed concentrated battle damage from multiple heavy weapons. Professional attack geometry. No lucky encounter. This was planned assassination. They interviewed surviving Zero pilots. All reported the same details. Twin boom fighters. Silver in color. Incredibly fast. Devastating firepower. Appearing suddenly at the exact moment Yamamoto's formation approached Balale. On April 24th, Nakagawa presented his findings to Vice Admiral Junichi Kusaka, commander of Southeast Area Fleet. The conclusions were undeniable and terrifying. The Americans possessed fighter aircraft with operational range exceeding 800 miles. They had broken Japanese naval codes at the highest levels. They could read fleet communications in real time. They had executed a precision strike that demonstrated intelligence superiority, technological advantage, and operational capability that Japanese forces could not match. Kusaka's response was immediate. He ordered all high-ranking officers to change travel schedules without advance notice. He implemented new communication protocols. He mandated fighter escorts be tripled for any transport missions. Most critically, he sent urgent requests to Imperial Japanese Navy headquarters demanding information about this twin-boom American fighter. What was it? How many existed? What were its capabilities? How could Japanese forces counter it? The answers when they arrived provided no comfort. American intelligence intercepts decoded after the war revealed Japanese naval intelligence's growing panic throughout May 1943. One report dated May 8 noted, "Enemy twin-engine fighter designated P-38 by Americans. Maximum range estimated 1,200 miles with external tanks. Speed approximately 400 miles per hour. Armament 4 heavy machine guns plus cannon, all nose-mounted. Heavily armored. Our Zero fighters report extreme difficulty engaging this aircraft. Attacks from behind encounter concentrated defensive fire. Head-on attacks are suicidal." Japanese losses to P-38s increased dramatically throughout May and June 1943. Before Yamamoto's death, Japanese bomber formations operating over the Solomon Islands suffered approximately 8% losses per mission. After American P-38 squadrons began aggressive long-range intercepts, that number jumped to 23%. Some missions experienced 40% losses. Japanese bomber crews accustomed to operating with relative impunity deep inside their defensive perimeter now faced American fighters that could reach targets previously considered safe. Rabaul, the massive Japanese base complex in New Britain, lay 560 miles from Henderson Field. Too far for any American fighter, except the P-38. On June 16, 1943, 12 P-38s from the 339th and 347th Fighter Squadrons executed a long-range strike against Japanese shipping in Rabaul Harbor. The formation flew 560 miles, engaged 30 Japanese fighters, destroyed 4 cargo vessels, and returned home. Total mission time, 4 hours and 15 minutes. Japanese commanders were stunned. If American fighters could reach Rabaul, no target in the Solomon Islands was safe. But the P-38's dominance created unexpected problems for American forces. The aircraft's exceptional performance had revealed critical weaknesses in operational planning and logistics. Lieutenant Colonel Edward Rector, commanding officer of the 347th Fighter Group, confronted these problems directly in July 1943. His P-38 squadrons were flying 12 to 15 missions per week, pushing aircraft and pilots to their operational limits. Engine failures increased. Combat losses mounted. Maintenance crews worked 16-hour shifts, keeping aircraft operational. Replacement parts arrived slowly. Trained P-38 pilots were scarce. And most concerning, the extreme long-range missions were killing pilots through exhaustion rather than combat. Captain James Watkins, a P-38 pilot with 12 confirmed victories, described the situation. "We'd fly 4 hours over ocean, fight for 10 minutes, fly 4 hours back, land exhausted, sleep 6 hours, do it again the next day. The physical strain was brutal. Your hands cramped from holding the controls, your back ached from the parachute, your eyes burned from scanning for enemy fighters. Some guys fell asleep in the cockpit on the return flight. That's how you died. Not from Japanese bullets, from exhaustion." On July 21, 1943, this exhaustion killed Lieutenant Marcus Bailey. Bailey led a 4-plane section escorting B-24 bombers to Kahili Airfield, 310 miles from Henderson Field. The mission went perfectly. No Japanese fighters intercepted. Bombers hit their target. Bailey's section turned for home. But Bailey, flying on minimal sleep after 3 consecutive days of long-range missions, apparently lost consciousness during the return flight. His P-38 gradually descended, eventually striking the ocean at high speed. His wingman watched helplessly, unable to wake Bailey over the radio, unable to do anything except witness his friend's death. The incident sparked intense debate within 5th Air Force headquarters. Some officers argued P-38 pilots needed mandatory rest periods. Others insisted the operational tempo was necessary. Japanese forces were retreating across the Solomon Islands. American pressure had to be maintained. The argument reached General George Kenney, commanding general of 5th Air Force. Kenney's solution was practical and brutal. Double the number of P-38 squadrons. Rotate pilots more frequently. Accept higher maintenance costs. We're winning this war with the Lightning. Whatever it costs, we pay it. But Japanese forces weren't surrendering quietly. On August 15, 1943, they launched a coordinated counterstrike that would test everything the P-38 had achieved. Japanese intelligence had identified Henderson Field's vulnerability. American P-38 squadrons operated from a single airfield with limited dispersal. One successful strike could destroy dozens of aircraft on the ground. The Japanese assembled a massive formation, 48 Mitsubishi G4M bombers, escorted by 70 A6M0 fighters. The target Henderson Field at dawn, when American fighters would be refueling after morning patrol. The attack was scheduled for August 15th at 0630 hours. But American intelligence, reading Japanese communications through broken codes, knew the attack was coming. Major Mitchell, now Squadron Operations Officer, after his success in the Yamamoto mission, planned the defense. He positioned 24 P-38s at 25,000 feet altitude northeast of Guadalcanal. Another 18 P-38s waited at Henderson Field engines, warm ready for immediate launch. When Japanese radar operators detected the incoming raid at 06:15 hours, Mitchell's trap was set. The Japanese formation approached Henderson Field from the northwest, maintaining tight formation, confident in their numerical superiority. They expected to encounter 12 to 15 American fighters. Instead, 42 P-38 Lightnings hit them from 3 directions simultaneously. Mitchell's high-altitude element dove from 25,000 feet building speed to over 450 miles per hour. The Henderson Field element launched and climbed aggressively to meet the bombers head-on. A third element, held in reserve, attacked from the flanks. The Japanese formation disintegrated in 6 minutes of savage combat. P-38s destroyed 18 bombers in the first pass. 18. The concentrated nose armament 450 caliber machine guns plus 120 mm cannon, all firing at the same point, was devastating against lightly built Japanese bombers. Captain Frank Holmes, flying Mitchell's wing, later described the effect. You'd line up a bomber in your gun sight, fire a 2-second burst. The bomber would explode, just explode. Wings separating, fuselage breaking apart, burning debris falling. I destroyed 3 bombers in 4 minutes. I'd never seen anything like it. The Zero escorts tried to protect their bombers, but faced impossible odds. P-38s attacked with speed and altitude advantage. They'd dive through the formation at 450 miles per hour, fire concentrated bursts, then climb away before Zeros could react. Japanese pilots accustomed to turning fights where their superior maneuverability dominated couldn't force the P-38s to engage on their terms. By 06:42 hours, 27 minutes after the attack began, the battle was over. Japanese losses: 24 bombers destroyed, 11 bombers damaged and forced to ditch before reaching Base 9. 0 fighters destroyed. American losses: 2 P-38s damaged, both pilots recovered safely. 0 fatalities. The ratio was devastating. 35 Japanese aircraft destroyed for 2. American aircraft damaged. The Japanese raid intended to cripple Henderson Field had instead demonstrated the P-38's complete dominance of Pacific skies. News of the August 15th battle spread rapidly through American and Japanese forces. For American pilots, it confirmed what they already knew. The P-38 Lightning, properly employed with altitude advantage and tactical discipline, was nearly invincible against Japanese aircraft. For Japanese pilots, the battle represented a psychological breaking point. Lieutenant Yasuhiko Kuroe, a Zero pilot who survived the August 15th battle, was interviewed by Japanese intelligence officers afterward. His report, captured by American forces in 1945, revealed the terror Japanese pilots felt facing P-38s. The fork-tailed fighter is death. You cannot catch it. You cannot escape it. It dives faster than anything we fly. It climbs higher. When it attacks, you see nothing but tracers and explosions. Our pilots are brave, but bravery means nothing against a weapon we cannot fight. We need new tactics, new aircraft, something that can match the American advantage. Without it, we will all die. Japanese Naval Aviation Headquarters responded to these reports with desperate measures. They developed new formations designed to protect bombers from high-speed diving attacks. They trained Zero pilots in defensive scissors maneuvers. They experimented with higher altitude operations. Nothing worked. P-38 pilots adapted faster than Japanese tacticians could develop counters. By September 1943, Japanese bomber operations over the Solomon Islands had effectively ceased. The losses were unsustainable. Entire bomber squadrons were being destroyed in single missions. The P-38 had achieved what American strategists thought impossible: complete air superiority across thousands of miles of Pacific theater. The strategic impact was immediate and overwhelming. American ground forces on Guadalcanal and New Georgia operated without Japanese air attack. Supply convoys ran unmolested. Bomber formations struck Japanese bases with minimal losses. Japanese forces cut off from reinforcement and resupply began retreating north through the Solomon Islands. General Douglas MacArthur, Supreme Commander Southwest Pacific Area, noted the change in a September 28 dispatch. Air superiority has shifted decisively in our favor. Japanese aircraft avoid contact with our fighters. Their bomber operations have collapsed. The P-38 Lightning has proven to be the decisive weapon in this theater. The numbers told the complete story. Between April 18 and September 30, 1943, P-38 squadrons in the Pacific Theater destroyed 412 Japanese aircraft with confirmed kills. Another 187 were listed as probable victories. American P-38 losses during the same period: 41 aircraft to enemy action, 23 to operational accidents. The kill ratio was greater than 10 to 1. Individual P-38 pilots became legendary. Major Richard Bong destroyed 28 Japanese aircraft between September 1942 and September 1943, becoming America's leading ace. Captain Thomas Maguire claimed 24 victories in the same period. Captain Thomas Lanphier, who'd helped eliminate Yamamoto, finished the year with 11 confirmed kills. These weren't just statistics. Each destroyed Japanese aircraft represented a trained pilot killed or wounded, an irreplaceable machine lost, a mission failed. Japan's industrial capacity couldn't replace losses at these rates. Their pilot training program couldn't produce experienced aviators fast enough. The mathematical outcome was inevitable. American forces were winning the air war through technological superiority and operational excellence. Japanese military leadership recognized this reality. In October 1943, they withdrew remaining bomber units from Rabaul to Truk, 700 miles north. They stopped attempting daylight raids against American-held positions. They adopted defensive postures, conceding air superiority, hoping to preserve their remaining forces for battles closer to Japan's home islands. The P-38 Lightning had accomplished what no other weapons system had achieved. It had forced the Japanese military to fundamentally change their strategic approach. The decisive weapon wasn't a battleship or aircraft carrier or bomber. It was a fighter aircraft that could fly farther, fight harder, and return home safely. Mitchell's navigation skill, combined with the P-38's exceptional range and firepower, had proven that technological advantage properly employed could overcome numerical superiority and tactical experience. But this success raised a question that would haunt American commanders through the remainder of the war. If one precisely planned mission could eliminate an enemy commander and change strategic outcomes, what else was possible? What other targets could be reached? What other impossible missions could succeed? And most importantly, what would happen to the quiet pilot from Mississippi who'd made it all possible? The war was far from over. The P-38 would fly thousands more missions. But the story of how it came to dominate Pacific skies, how one man's navigation skill and one aircraft's extraordinary capabilities changed the course of the war, that story had reached its climax. The fork-tailed devil had spoken. The Japanese had heard its voice and understood its message. Nowhere was safe. No target was beyond reach. And the outcome of the Pacific War, once uncertain, was now inevitable. What remained was one final chapter. The legacy of this aircraft, the fate of the pilots who flew it, and the lessons learned from the most successful long-range fighter intercept in military history. That story, the conclusion of this extraordinary tale, belongs to Part 4. From a quiet Mississippi pilot with supernatural navigation skills to the elimination of Pearl Harbor's architect. From an experimental long-range intercept that military experts called impossible to complete air superiority across the Pacific Theater. Major John Mitchell's perfect navigation guided 18 P-38 Lightnings 435 miles across open ocean, arriving exactly on schedule to change the course of World War II. The fork-tailed devil destroyed 412 Japanese aircraft in 5 months, forced Japan's Air Force into retreat, and proved that technological superiority combined with tactical brilliance could overcome any enemy. But here's what history books rarely tell you. The story of Mitchell and the P-38 Lightning doesn't end with military victory, because sometimes the greatest achievements come with costs no one expects. Sometimes the heroes who change warfare disappear into obscurity. And sometimes the weapon that wins battles creates legacies that echo far beyond the war that birthed it. This is that story. The final chapter of how one aircraft, one mission, and one man's skill created ripples that still affect military aviation 80 years later. Major John Mitchell survived World War II. He flew 94 combat missions, destroyed 11 Japanese aircraft personally, and led dozens of successful long-range intercepts. His navigation expertise saved countless American lives. His tactical planning changed how fighter operations were conducted across the Pacific theater. And when the war ended on September 2, 1945, Mitchell returned to the United States, expecting recognition celebration, perhaps promotion to high command. Instead, he received a handshake, a discharge, and a train ticket home to Enid, Mississippi. The Navy Cross he'd earned for the Yamamoto mission was the highest decoration he'd receive. No promotion to general, no command position, no role in shaping post-war Air Force doctrine. Mitchell disappeared from public view almost immediately. He took a job as a commercial pilot flying cargo routes across the southern United States. He married, raised 3 children, lived quietly in a small house outside Jackson, Mississippi. When people asked about his war service, he'd mention flying P-38s, usually changing the subject quickly. The man who'd executed the most audacious fighter intercept in military history became invisible. Why? The official reason was security classification. Operation Vengeance remained top secret until 1960. The U.S. government, concerned about revealing its code-breaking capabilities, suppressed all public discussion of the Yamamoto mission. Mitchell couldn't talk about his greatest achievement, couldn't explain how his navigation skill had eliminated Japan's most brilliant naval commander, couldn't claim credit for changing the Pacific War's trajectory. For 15 years, the mission that defined his life remained classified, unknowable, unremarkable to everyone except the pilots who'd flown it. But there was another reason. Mitchell didn't want recognition. Interviews conducted decades later revealed a man haunted by Lieutenant Raymond Hines' death. Hines, the pilot who'd run out of fuel on the return flight from the Yamamoto mission, had followed Mitchell's orders perfectly, had trusted Mitchell's calculations, had died because Mitchell's fuel planning, perfect as it was, couldn't account for every variable. Mitchell carried that guilt for the rest of his life. In a 1982 interview 3 years before his death, Mitchell said quietly, "We eliminated Yamamoto. We won that battle. But Ray Hines died following my orders. Was one Japanese admiral worth one American pilot's life? I've never been certain." Captain Thomas Lanphier, who'd shared credit for shooting down Yamamoto's bomber, took a different path. Lanphier embraced fame enthusiastically. He wrote articles, gave speeches, claimed sole credit for the kill, and built a post-war career on his war hero status. The conflict between Lanphier's version of events and other pilots' accounts created controversy that lasted decades. Lieutenant Rex Barber, who'd also engaged Yamamoto's bomber, insisted his guns had delivered the fatal rounds. Gun camera evidence was inconclusive. Japanese wreckage investigation couldn't determine which P-38 had fired the killing burst. The debate consumed military aviation historians for 50 years, overshadowing Mitchell's navigation achievement and reducing Operation Vengeance to a petty argument about individual credit. Mitchell refused to participate in the debate. When asked who deserved credit, he'd simply say, 18 pilots flew that mission, 17 came home. That's what matters. The contrast between Mitchell's quiet dignity and Lanphier's self-promotion revealed something profound about heroism. The man who made the mission possible through meticulous planning and perfect execution wanted no recognition. The man who pulled the trigger wanted immortality. History, as it often does, gave fame to the wrong person. But Mitchell's real legacy wasn't about credit or recognition or fame. His legacy was something far more important and far more lasting. It was the tactical doctrine he'd created and the operational philosophy that would define long-range fighter operations for the next 80 years. The P-38 Lightning continued dominating Pacific skies through the war's final 2 years. By August 1945, when Japan surrendered, P-38 squadrons had destroyed 857 Japanese aircraft, with confirmed kills more than any other American fighter type in the Pacific. The aircraft's exceptional range enabled escort missions that protected B-29 bomber formations, striking Japan's home islands. Major Richard Bong finished the war as America's leading ace, with 40 victories, all in P-38s. Major Thomas Maguire scored 38 victories before his death in January 1945, also flying P-38s exclusively. These achievements validated everything Lockheed's designers had envisioned when they created the twin-boom fighter in 1937. But the P-38's influence extended far beyond World War II. The tactical lessons learned from Mitchell's long-range intercepts became fundamental doctrine for U.S. Air Force operations. The concept of using fighters as long-range strike weapons, capable of penetrating deep into enemy territory, destroying high-value targets, and returning safely, became standard practice. During the Korean War, F-80 Shooting Stars and F-86 Sabres flew long-range interdiction missions using tactics Mitchell had pioneered. In Vietnam, F-4 Phantoms conducted similar deep penetration strikes. Modern F-15 Eagles and F-22 Raptors carry internal fuel capacity exceeding 18,000 pounds, enabling combat radius approaching 1,000 miles, continuing the long-range fighter philosophy the P-38 established. The P-38's twin-engine configuration influenced multiple post-war designs. The Soviet Union's PE-2 reconnaissance aircraft borrowed the twin-boom layout. Britain's de Havilland Hornet fighter adopted twin-engine reliability for long-range Pacific operations. Even modern aircraft like the A-10 Thunderbolt II use twin-engine designs specifically for the redundancy and survivability advantages Mitchell's pilots had demonstrated. Between 1943 and 1945, the P-38 Lightning flew approximately 130,000 combat missions across all theaters. Pilots credited the aircraft's twin-engine design with saving their lives after battle damage destroyed one engine. The concentrated nose armament Mitchell's pilots had used so effectively became standard on jet fighters. The F-86 Sabre F-100 Super Sabre and F-104 Starfighter all mounted guns in the nose, eliminating convergence issues that plagued wing-mounted weapons. Perhaps most significantly, the intelligence coup that made Operation Vengeance possible revealed how completely American code-breaking had penetrated Japanese communications. After the war, captured Japanese documents showed that Imperial Navy commanders suspected their codes were compromised but couldn't determine how or when. The Yamamoto intercept should have proven definitively that American intelligence could read their most sensitive communications. Instead, Japanese officers attributed the attack to coincidence, refusing to believe American fighters could fly 435 miles and intercept precisely on schedule through anything except extraordinary luck. This denial allowed American cryptanalysts to continue reading Japanese naval communications through the war's final 2 years, providing intelligence that enabled decisive victories at the Philippine Sea and Leyte Gulf. The total number of lives saved through continued code-breaking superiority cannot be calculated precisely, but military historians estimate it shortened the Pacific War by 6 to 12 months, potentially saving 100,000 to 200,000 American casualties. Mitchell's mission, successful as it was in eliminating Yamamoto, achieved something even more valuable by maintaining the secrecy of American intelligence capabilities. But the real lesson of Mitchell's achievement transcends tactics, aircraft design, and intelligence operations. The lesson is about institutional resistance to innovation and the courage required to attempt the impossible. When Mitchell first calculated that P-38s could reach Yamamoto's position and return safely, every conventional military analysis said he was wrong. The distances were too great. The fuel margins were too thin. The navigation requirements were impossible. Standard doctrine insisted that fighters operate within 200 miles of their bases where tactical control could be maintained, and rescue operations could reach downed pilots. Mitchell's plan violated every established principle of fighter operations. And yet he was right. He was right because he'd studied P-38 performance exhaustively, because he'd developed navigation skills that bordered on supernatural, because he was willing to trust his calculations against conventional wisdom. The willingness to attempt what experts call impossible defines breakthrough innovation in every field. During World War II, multiple crazy ideas changed warfare despite institutional resistance. The Norden bomb sight, which military analysts said couldn't deliver the accuracy its designers promised, enabled precision bombing that destroyed German industrial capacity. Radar-guided night fighters, which Royal Air Force commanders initially dismissed as unnecessary, broke the back of German bomber offensive over Britain. Landing craft mechanized, which Army planners considered too vulnerable for amphibious assault, enabled every major Pacific Island invasion. Each innovation faced the same obstacles Mitchell encountered. Experts said it couldn't work. Commanders said it was too risky. Conventional wisdom said existing methods were sufficient. And in each case, individuals willing to challenge orthodoxy, willing to test their theories, willing to risk failure, proved that impossible was just another word for hasn't been done yet. Modern military innovation faces identical challenges. Drone warfare, cyber operations, artificial intelligence integration all encountered resistance from officers trained in conventional warfare. Today's equivalents of Mitchell are fighting the same battles against institutional inertia, proving through success what established doctrine says cannot work. The parallel extends beyond military applications. Every industry, every organization, every field of human endeavor faces the tension between proven methods and untested innovation. The people who change industries are rarely the experts at the top of organizational hierarchies. They're the John Mitchells quietly working at squadron level, seeing problems from perspectives. Leadership overlooks developing solutions that seem crazy until they succeed spectacularly. Which brings us to a final detail most people never learn, a twist in this story that reveals just how close Operation Vengeance came to never happening. Declassified documents released in 2005 showed that Admiral Nimitz's authorization for the Yamamoto mission was nearly blocked by Secretary of the Navy Frank Knox. Knox, concerned about the ethics of targeted assassination, initially recommended against presidential approval. The deciding factor: Knox's aide showed him casualty statistics from Pearl Harbor. 403 Americans killed. 178 wounded. All planned by Admiral Yamamoto. Knox changed his recommendation within minutes. President Roosevelt approved the mission 3 hours later. If Knox's aide hadn't thought to present those statistics, if Knox had maintained his initial objection, if Roosevelt had decided targeted assassination, set dangerous precedent, Mitchell's P-38 formation would never have launched. The most successful long-range fighter intercept in military history. The mission that demonstrated American technological and intelligence superiority. The operation that forced Japan's air forces into retreat almost didn't happen because of ethical concerns debated in Washington offices by men who'd never flown combat missions. That detail, revealed 60 years after the war ended, underscores the razor-thin margins separating success from failure, fame from obscurity, victory from defeat. Major John Mitchell died on November 15, 1985, at age 73, in a Veterans Administration hospital in Jackson, Mississippi. His funeral drew maybe 50 people. No military bands, no honor guards, no speeches about his extraordinary achievements. The man whose navigation had changed the Pacific War was buried quietly, remembered by family and a handful of surviving squadron mates who understood what he'd accomplished. His obituary in the Jackson Clarion Ledger ran 4 paragraphs. It mentioned his service as a fighter pilot in World War II, his post-war career as a commercial aviator, his surviving family members. It did not mention Operation Vengeance, did not explain that his calculations had enabled the elimination of Pearl Harbor's architect, did not note that his navigation skills were so exceptional that Japanese intelligence officers refused to believe what he'd achieved. Mitchell would have preferred it that way. He never sought recognition, never claimed he'd done anything remarkable. If you'd asked him about his greatest achievement, he'd probably have mentioned teaching his children to fly or helping his grandchildren with their homework. The mission that defined his life was simply something he'd done because commanders needed it done, and he had the skills to succeed. But history remembers even when individuals prefer obscurity. The P-38 Lightning Mitchell flew so expertly, the aircraft he'd pushed beyond its designed limits now sits in museums across America. The National Museum of the United States Air Force displays a P-38L with the same silver paint scheme Mitchell's formation wore during the Yamamoto mission. Children press their faces against plexiglass barriers, staring at the twin booms, the tricycle landing gear, the concentrated nose armament, not understanding what this aircraft represented or what it accomplished. Perhaps that's appropriate. The greatest achievements often appear ordinary in retrospect. What seemed impossible in 1943 looks routine 80 years later, because Mitchell and pilots like him proved it could be done, transforming the impossible into the expected, the extraordinary into the standard. From a Mississippi farm boy with a gift for navigation to the elimination of Pearl Harbor's architect. From an impossible mission that required perfect calculation across 435 miles of featureless ocean to complete air superiority over the Pacific theater. John Mitchell proved that expertise matters more than rank, that preparation defeats improvisation, that the courage to attempt what others call impossible creates victories that change history. His 18 P-38 Lightnings flew 870 miles that April morning in 1943. They eliminated the enemy's most brilliant naval commander. They demonstrated technological superiority Japan could not match. They forced an entire nation to retreat from skies they'd once dominated. And they saved through shortened war and intelligence advantages, maintained an estimated 100,000 American lives. Mitchell never sought credit for these achievements, never demanded recognition, never claimed to be anything more than a pilot doing his job. Perhaps that humility, that quiet competence, that willingness to let results speak for themselves represents the highest form of heroism. Not the dramatic speeches, not the medals and ceremonies, not the public recognition. Just the knowledge that when your nation called, when the mission seemed impossible, when experts said it couldn't be done, you calculated the odds, trusted your skills, and succeeded anyway. That's the legacy of Major John Mitchell and the P-38 Lightning he flew into history. Not fame, not glory. Just the quiet certainty that some people in critical moments possess the courage and skill to accomplish what everyone else believes is impossible. And sometimes that's enough to change the world.